My sister wore my wedding dress to her engagement party. It looks better on someone who deserves love, she laughed. The family applauded. I didn't react. Instead, I smiled. And let the screen tell the truth she'd buried. It looks better on someone who deserves love, Layla laughed, twirling in my wedding dress as our entire family applauded. I stood frozen in the doorway of her engagement party, watching my sister parade around in the dress I'd saved 8 months to buy. The dress that was supposed to be mine. The dress she'd stolen from my closet just hours before her big night. My hands trembled as I gripped my purse, feeling the weight of the remote control inside. The same remote that would soon reveal truths that would destroy her perfect evening. But first, let me tell you how I got here. How a lifetime of living in Layla's shadow led to this moment of reckoning. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories that matter. If you believe that family betrayal should never go unchallenged and that truth deserves to be heard, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need justice. Now let's see how this unfolds. From the moment Layla entered this world 3 years after me, she became the sun around which our family orbited. I remember my 7th birthday party, 20 kids from school, a chocolate cake I'd requested for weeks and party games I'd planned with Mom. Then Layla toddled into the room wearing a princess dress, her golden curls bouncing as she giggled. Within minutes, every guest abandoned my birthday activities to fawn over my adorable little sister. The photos from that day tell the story. Me standing alone by my untouched cake while everyone crowded around Layla, who basked in the attention like she was born for it. That pattern repeated itself endlessly. Christmas mornings where her squeals of delight overshadowed my quiet thank yous. School concerts where Mom's camera focused exclusively on Layla's kindergarten solo while my 8th grade speech went unrecorded. Family dinners where Dad would ask about her finger paintings while my honor roll achievements earned a distracted, "That's nice, sweetheart," without him even looking up from his plate. By high school I'd learned to measure my worth in shadows. When Layla made varsity cheerleading as a freshman, something unheard of at our school, the local newspaper featured her on the front page. That same week I'd won the state debate championship, earning a small mention buried on page 6. Mom framed Layla's article and hung it in the living room. My trophy gathered dust on my bedroom shelf. "You're just different types of special," Mom would say whenever I dared voice my hurt. But we both knew which type of special mattered more in our house. College offered temporary escape from the Golden Girl comparisons. At Henderson and Associates, I threw myself into building something that was entirely mine, a marketing career where my strategic mind and analytical skills could finally shine. I arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for the impossible accounts that others avoided. My first year, I single-handedly saved the Peterson manufacturing contract when their previous account manager quit mid-campaign. The client personally requested me for all future projects. For the first time in my life I felt valuable. Irreplaceable even. The promotion to senior account manager seemed inevitable. I'd pitched the winning strategy for 3 major campaigns, brought in 2 new 6-figure clients, and consistently exceeded every performance metric. When Mr. Henderson called me into his office that Tuesday morning, I walked in expecting congratulations. Instead, he offered condolences about my disappointment, and assured me that next time would be different. The promotion went to Jessica Chin, who'd been with the company half as long and had never landed a client worth more than $50,000. The explanation was vague. Something about client relationship skills and team dynamics. Words that felt like knives twisting in my chest. Watching Jessica move into the corner office I'd coveted felt like reliving every childhood disappointment. The same hollow ache, the same bewildered question. What was wrong with me? But then I found the dress. After months of half-heartedly browsing bridal magazines and websites, I discovered it tucked away in a small boutique downtown. The moment I saw it through the window, my breath caught. Ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves, a flowing train that whispered promises of fairy tale endings. It was elegant without being ostentatious, romantic without being frivolous. Everything I'd dreamed of but never dared hope for. The price tag made my stomach drop. $3,000. More than I'd ever spent on anything for myself. But standing in that fitting room, watching the way the silk caught the light, seeing how the lace made my skin glow, I felt beautiful for the first time in years. "Oh, honey," the saleswoman breathed when I emerged from the dressing room. That dress was made for you. Even Mom, who rarely offered compliments that weren't comparative, smiled genuinely when I sent her the photo. You look radiant, sweetheart. Absolutely radiant. I bought it that day despite my modest salary and mounting student loans. For 8 months, I ate lunch at my desk, skipped coffee dates with friends, and walked to work to save on parking fees. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I glimpsed the dress hanging in my closet, wrapped in protective plastic like a precious secret. Then David walked into Murphy's Coffee House on that rain-soaked Thursday evening, and everything changed. I ducked inside to escape the downpour, my presentation materials soaked despite my umbrella's best efforts. David was already there, laptop open, dark hair slightly mussed from his own battle with the weather. When he looked up and smiled, offering to share his corner table, I felt something shift inside my chest. Rough day? He asked, nodding toward my dripping folder. Career-defining disaster, more likely, I laughed, surprised by my own honesty. He listened as I vented about the Peterson contract complications, asked thoughtful questions about my marketing strategies, and never once checked his phone. When I finally glanced at my watch, we'd been talking for 3 hours. I should let you get back to your work, I said, gathering my now dry papers. Actually, David said, closing his laptop, would you like to continue this conversation over dinner? Somewhere with better lighting and worse coffee. Our first official date stretched until midnight. David had this way of making me feel like the only person in the room, like my thoughts and opinions mattered deeply to him. He was a software engineer with gentle hands and kind eyes, someone who preferred quiet bookstores to crowded bars, who remembered small details about my day and asked follow-up questions about projects I'd mentioned weeks earlier. For 6 months we built something beautiful and private. Sunday morning farmers market visits where he'd buy me fresh flowers just because he liked seeing me smile. Quiet dinners where we'd discuss everything from childhood dreams to future plans. Long walks where comfortable silences felt as natural as conversation. David made me feel seen in ways I'd never experienced. He celebrated my small victories at work, offered comfort during setbacks, and never once made me feel like I was competing for his attention. Then came the family dinner that changed everything. I can't wait to meet this mysterious boyfriend, Mom had said over the phone. Bring him to Sunday dinner this week. Layla will be there too. She's been dying to meet him. I should have known better. I should have remembered that Layla couldn't bear for anything to exist outside her gravitational pull. The moment David stepped into our childhood home, I watched my sister's eyes light up with interest that had nothing to do with sisterly curiosity. She appeared at the top of the stairs in a flowing sundress that perfectly matched her eyes, her hair cascading over her shoulders in waves that seemed to catch every ray of sunlight streaming through the windows. So you're the famous David, she said, extending her hand with a smile that could have powered the entire neighborhood. I've heard absolutely nothing about you, which means my sister is either very secretive or very selfish. David laughed, that easy, genuine laugh I'd fallen in love with, and I felt the first crack in my foundation. Throughout dinner, Layla peppered him with questions about his startup company, his hiking adventures, his plans for the future. She leaned forward when he spoke, laughed at his jokes with perfect timing, and shared just enough about her own life to seem fascinating without overshadowing him. I watched it happen in real time. The subtle shift in David's attention, the way his responses to Layla grew longer and more animated while his answers to me became polite but distracted. By dessert, I felt like a stranger at my own relationship's funeral. Your sister is amazing, David said on the drive home, his voice carrying a warmth that used to be reserved for me alone. That night, lying in bed beside my wedding dress, I finally understood what I'd been too naive to see before. Some shadows were too deep to escape, some golden lights too bright to compete with. But I had no idea how far Layla would go to ensure I never stepped out of the darkness again. The phone rang 3 days later while I was reviewing quarterly reports at my desk. Hey, it's me. Layla's voice bubbled through the speaker with unusual enthusiasm. I was thinking, since David seems so wonderful, why don't we all do something together this weekend? Maybe that new rooftop bar downtown? I could bring Marcus. Marcus was her latest conquest, a hedge fund manager she'd been seeing for exactly 2 weeks. The suggestion seemed innocent enough, but something in her tone made my stomach tighten. I don't know, Layla. David and I were planning a quiet weekend. Oh, come on. It'll be fun. Besides, I barely got to talk to him at dinner. I want to get to know the man who's stolen my sister's heart. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Saturday evening, I spent an hour getting ready, settling on a black cocktail dress that David had once said looked stunning on me. When we arrived at the bar, Layla was already there, wearing a flowing emerald dress that seemed to shimmer under the ambient lighting. She looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, while I suddenly felt overdressed and trying too hard. "David," she exclaimed, standing to hug him with the kind of warmth typically reserved for old friends. "You look fantastic. That shirt brings out your eyes." Throughout the evening, I watched Layla work her magic. She remembered every detail David had mentioned at dinner. His college roommate's startup, his hiking trip to Colorado, even his favorite obscure band. When Marcus stepped away to take a call, she seamlessly shifted all her attention to David, leaning in conspiratorially as she shared stories about their mutual love of vintage vinyl records. "Wait, you have an original pressing of Blue Train?" David's eyes lit up in a way I recognized but had never been able to inspire myself. "In mint condition," Layla laughed, touching his arm lightly. "You'll have to come over sometime and listen to it properly. My sound system does it justice." The invitation hung in the air like a challenge I couldn't meet. I didn't own vintage records or high-end audio equipment. I didn't even particularly like jazz. Monday morning brought the first crack in my professional foundation. I arrived at Henderson and Associates to find my assistant, Patricia, looking uncomfortable as she approached my desk. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Henderson wants to see you immediately," she said, avoiding eye contact. "It's about the Morrison account." The Morrison account was my baby, a tech startup campaign I'd been developing for 3 months. I'd crafted their entire brand strategy, from target demographics to messaging architecture. The presentation was scheduled for Thursday and I'd been polishing it obsessively. Mr. Henderson's office felt colder than usual as I sat across from his imposing mahogany desk. "I'm reassigning Morrison to Jessica," he said without preamble. "She'll be presenting your preliminary work this week." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Sir, I don't understand. Is there a problem with my approach?" "It's not about problems. It's about fit. Jessica has more experience with tech startups." But I landed the account. "I've been developing the strategy since. The decision is final." His tone brooked no argument. "You'll be taking over the Henderson Hardware refresh instead." Henderson Hardware was his brother's failing tools store, a pity project everyone knew was doomed. As I walked back to my desk, I felt eyes following me, whispers trailing in my wake. Jessica stood by the copier, studying what I recognized as my Morrison presentation materials, already making notes in the margins. The technical difficulties started small. An important email to a client disappeared from my sent folder, leaving me scrambling to explain why I hadn't followed up on their request. My calendar mysteriously cleared itself of a crucial meeting, causing me to miss a deadline by 3 days. A presentation file corrupted an hour before I was supposed to deliver it, forcing me to improvise with handwritten notes while my colleagues exchanged concerned glances. "These things happen," I told myself, but the incidents were becoming too frequent to ignore. David's behavior began shifting around the same time. Our nightly phone calls, once lasting hours, dwindled to brief check-ins about scheduling and logistics. When we did spend time together, he seemed distracted, frequently glancing at his phone or bringing up topics I'd never heard him discuss before. "Layla mentioned this great hiking trail up north," he said during dinner one Tuesday evening. "She thinks we'd really enjoy it." "When did you talk to Layla about hiking?" "Oh, she texted me some recommendations. She's really thoughtful that way." The casual way he said it, like ongoing communication with my sister, was perfectly normal, made my chest tighten. I wanted to ask when they'd exchanged numbers what other recommendations she'd shared, why she was texting my boyfriend at all. Instead, I smiled and nodded, swallowing my questions like bitter medicine. The pattern continued. Layla would mention a restaurant she thought David would love, and suddenly he'd suggest we try it. She'd recommend a book and I'd find it on his nightstand. Their inside jokes multiplied. References to conversations I hadn't been part of, shared opinions about movies I'd never heard them discuss. Then Grandma Rose had her stroke. The call came at 6 in the morning. Mom's voice was shaking as she explained that Grandma had been found unconscious in her bathroom, that the paramedics were rushing her to St. Mary's Hospital, that we needed to come immediately. I threw on clothes and raced to the hospital, arriving to find Layla already there, holding Mom's hand in the waiting room. She looked perfectly put together despite the early hour, her hair styled and makeup flawless, while I felt like I'd been dragged through a hurricane. The doctor says it was a massive stroke, Layla whispered, tears glittering in her eyes. They're not sure about recovery. The next few days blurred together in a haze of hospital visits and difficult conversations. Layla appointed herself as Grandma's primary advocate, researching rehabilitation facilities, coordinating with doctors and organizing family schedules with military precision. She slept in the hospital chair, held Grandma's hand during procedures, and somehow managed to look graceful even while keeping vigil. I tried to help, but my work schedule made everything complicated. The Henderson hardware project was imploding spectacularly, requiring damage control meetings and crisis management sessions that I couldn't simply abandon. When I missed 2 consecutive visiting hours due to client emergencies, Layla's disappointment was palpable. I understand work is important, she said during one of our brief encounters in the hospital hallway, but this might be our last chance to spend time with her. The guilt hit me like a sledgehammer. Other family members began echoing similar sentiments, gentle but pointed observations about priorities and presence. Aunt Carol mentioned how wonderful it was that at least one granddaughter could be there consistently. Uncle Jim praised Layla's devotion while shooting meaningful glances in my direction. Meanwhile, my professional reputation continued crumbling. The Henderson hardware campaign failed so spectacularly that the local business journal wrote an article about it, using phrases like tone-deaf messaging and strategic missteps. My name was prominently featured as the account manager responsible for the disaster. Jessica's Morrison campaign, built on the foundation of my work, launched to critical acclaim and industry recognition. She was interviewed by Marketing Weekly about her innovative approach to tech startup branding, discussing strategies I'd developed during countless late nights and weekend research sessions. David's calls became even less frequent. When we did talk, he seemed distracted, offering abbreviated responses to questions that once would have sparked long conversations. He canceled our Saturday date to help a friend move, then postponed our makeup dinner because he was feeling under the weather. Maybe we should take a little break, he said during what I didn't realize would be our last real conversation. I've been feeling overwhelmed lately and I think I need some space to figure things out. The words felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced them in the mirror. I wanted to fight for us, to demand explanations, to ask what had changed so dramatically. Instead, I heard myself agreeing that space might be good for both of us. That night, I lay in bed staring at my wedding dress hanging in the closet, wondering when everything had started falling apart. The foundation I'd spent years building, my career, my relationship, my sense of self, felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet. I had no idea that the destruction was just beginning, or that the architect of my downfall was closer than I'd ever imagined. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was drowning in damage control from another mysteriously botched client presentation. My laptop completely crashed. Layla's voice carried just the right note of helpless frustration. I have this huge presentation for the art gallery tomorrow and everything's gone. You're so good with computers. Could you possibly come over and help me recover the files? Despite everything that had happened, she was still my sister. Family obligation ran deeper than personal grievances, or so I told myself as I drove to her downtown apartment with my toolkit of recovery software. Layla's place was immaculate as always. White furniture perfectly arranged, fresh flowers in crystal vases, not a single item out of place. She greeted me wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater that somehow managed to look effortlessly chic, her hair twisted into a messy bun that probably took 20 minutes to perfect. "You're a lifesaver," she said, leading me to her home office. "The screen just went black during a system update. I'm terrified I've lost everything." The laptop sat on her glass desk like a patient waiting for surgery. I plugged in my external drive and began running diagnostic software, while Layla hovered nearby, wringing her hands convincingly. "I'll grab us some tea while you work your magic," she said, disappearing into the kitchen. The recovery process was routine. I'd done this countless times for colleagues and friends. As files began populating on the screen, I absently scanned the folder names, looking for anything labeled gallery or presentation. Instead, my eyes caught on something that made my blood freeze. A folder named Sarah_work_stuff, sat prominently in her documents directory. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. Inside were dozens of screenshots, images of my email inbox, my calendar, my private client communications. Each file was meticulously labeled with dates and project names. There were photos of documents from my desk, taken at angles that suggested they'd been captured quickly when I wasn't looking. The room seemed to tilt as I scrolled deeper. Notes written in Layla's neat handwriting accompanied many files. Client unhappy with timeline, use this. Sarah stressed about Morrison deadline, perfect timing. Henderson meeting moved to Thursday, she doesn't know yet. My throat constricted as the implications crashed over me. Every mysterious technical failure, every missed deadline, every moment when I'd felt like I was losing my mind, it had all been orchestrated. I heard Layla's footsteps returning and quickly closed the folder, my heart hammering against my ribs. When she appeared with 2 steaming mugs, I somehow managed to keep my voice steady. Almost done. Just need to run one more scan. You're amazing. I don't know what I'd do without you. The casual way she said it, like she wasn't systematically destroying my life, made bile rise in my throat. I finished the recovery process on autopilot, my mind reeling with the magnitude of her deception. That night I couldn't sleep. Every interaction with Layla replayed in my head, viewed now through this horrifying new lens. The way she'd insisted on helping me organize my home office last month, claiming she wanted to understand my work better. How she'd borrowed my laptop when hers was acting up during family dinner. The innocent questions about my projects, my deadlines, my client relationships. I needed more evidence. If Layla was capable of this level of manipulation, there had to be more. Over the next week, I became a detective investigating my own sister. Using techniques I'd learned during a cybersecurity seminar, I traced IP addresses from suspicious emails, cross-referenced timing with her social media posts, and followed digital breadcrumbs she'd been careless enough to leave behind. The fake email accounts were the first breakthrough. j.morrison.techstartup@gmail.com had been sending complaints to my supervisors, claiming I'd missed crucial meetings and delivered subpar work. The writing style was too polished, too perfectly crafted to damage my reputation without seeming overtly malicious. But the real smoking gun was hidden in her cloud storage, a voice memo she'd recorded and apparently forgotten to delete. Marcus, you won't believe how perfectly this is working out. Layla's voice bubbled with excitement through my headphones. David is practically eating out of my hand now. I mean, he was Sarah's boyfriend, but that just made it more interesting, you know? Like winning the ultimate prize. Her friend's voice was harder to hear, but Layla's responses painted a clear picture of their conversation. Of course I feel bad for her, but honestly she's always been so pathetically grateful for any scrap of attention from men. It's almost sad how easy this was. Layla's laugh was sharp, cutting. Besides, David deserves someone who actually challenges him intellectually. Sarah's sweet, but she's so ordinary. The recording continued for 12 minutes. 12 minutes of my sister dissecting my relationship, my personality, my worth as a human being with the clinical detachment of a scientist studying insects. The work thing is just bonus revenge for all those years of playing the perfect daughter, she continued. Do you know she actually thought she deserved that promotion? Like being a workaholic mouse somehow makes you executive material. I sat in my car in the parking garage, tears streaming down my face as I listened to her catalog my failures and inadequacies. This wasn't sibling rivalry or jealousy. This was something darker, more calculated. My investigation deepened. Email chains between Layla and my colleagues revealed a web of manipulation that stretched back months. She'd positioned herself as the worried sister, sharing concerns about my mental health and professional stability with people I'd trusted. I'm so worried about Sarah, she'd written to Jessica. She's been under tremendous pressure at work and I think it's affecting her judgment. If you notice any signs that she's struggling, please let me know. Family is all we have, right? Jessica had responded with reassurance about keeping an eye on me, completely unaware that she was feeding information back to my saboteur. But the most devastating discovery came buried in her email drafts. Messages she'd composed but never sent, containing strategies for undermining my relationships with clients and colleagues. She'd mapped out my professional network like a military campaign, identifying weak points and planning her attacks with surgical precision. One draft made my hands shake as I read it. Phase 1. Establish credibility with Sarah's contacts as concerned family member. Phase 2. Document her vulnerabilities and stress points. Phase 3. Strategic interference with key projects. Phase 4. David. David had been part of her plan from the beginning. The engagement announcement came 3 weeks later, delivered with the theatrical flair Layla had perfected since childhood. I thought I was attending a regular family dinner. Mom had mentioned wanting to discuss Grandma Rose's care plan. I arrived straight from work, exhausted from another day of putting out fires I hadn't started, wearing a wrinkled blouse and yesterday's mascara. Layla was radiant in a flowing blue dress that matched her eyes perfectly, her engagement ring our grandmother's ring, the one I'd always been promised, catching the light as she gestured animatedly. David sat beside her, looking happier than I'd ever seen him, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders. "We have wonderful news," Mom announced, beaming with pride. "Layla and David are engaged." The room erupted in congratulations and tears of joy. Dad shook David's hand vigorously while Aunt Carol hugged Layla with genuine affection. Everyone was talking at once, sharing memories of their courtship, planning engagement parties and wedding dates. I sat frozen in my chair watching the scene unfold like a nightmare in slow motion. This was my family celebrating my sister's engagement to my former boyfriend, wearing my grandmother's ring, planning their future together in the ruins of my own. "Aren't you going to congratulate your sister?" Mom asked, her voice carrying a note of reproach that suggested my silence was being noticed. "Of course," I managed, standing on unsteady legs. "Congratulations, Layla. You got everything you wanted." She looked at me with those beautiful blue eyes that had charmed everyone for 25 years, and for just a moment, I saw something cold and calculating flash across her features. "Thank you, Sarah. That means everything coming from you." As the family continued their celebration around me, I realized that Layla hadn't just stolen my boyfriend or sabotaged my career. She'd orchestrated the complete destruction of my life with the patience and precision of a master chess player, and she'd made it look like love. That night, I drove home in a daze. The weight of Layla's engagement ring burned into my memory like a brand. But as I sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of my former life, something fundamental shifted inside me. The grief and shock crystallized into something harder, sharper, a determination that surprised me with its intensity. I pulled out my laptop and created a new folder, Project Truth. What followed were the most productive weeks of my life, though not in any way my former self would have recognized. I became an investigator, a digital archaeologist excavating the systematic destruction of my existence. Every evening after work, I spread documents across my dining table like a detective in a crime thriller, creating timelines that mapped Layla's interference against my professional failures. The pattern was breathtaking in its precision. Every major career setback coincided with a period of increased contact between Layla and my colleagues. The Morrison account reassignment happened 3 days after she'd had lunch with Jessica Chin. My calendar glitches always occurred within hours of Layla visiting our family home, where my spare laptop often sat charging in the kitchen. I printed email timestamps, cross-referenced social media posts, and documented every instance where Layla had positioned herself to gather intelligence about my work. The evidence filled 3 ring binders, each section marked with color-coded tabs that would have impressed my most meticulous project managers. The therapeutic value of this process surprised me. Each piece of evidence I cataloged felt like reclaiming a small piece of my stolen self-worth. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't incompetent. I had been systematically sabotaged by someone who knew exactly how to hurt me most effectively. But documentation alone wouldn't be enough. I needed leverage. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Saturday morning, I woke to my phone buzzing with a text from Layla. "Emergency. Can't find my wedding dress anywhere. Did I maybe hang it in your closet when I was trying it on?" So panicked. My blood turned to ice as I rushed to my bedroom closet. The protective plastic bag that had held my dress for 8 months hung empty, swaying slightly in the morning breeze from my open window. She hadn't just stolen my dress. She'd wanted me to know about it, to feel the violation of her taking the one thing that represented my dreams of happiness. I stared at that empty bag for a full minute, feeling something cold and calculating settle into my chest where warmth used to live. Then I called her back. "Oh my goodness, Layla, that's terrible. I injected just the right amount of concern into my voice. Let me check my closet thoroughly. Maybe it got pushed behind something else. You're such a lifesaver. I'm absolutely frantic. The engagement party is tonight, and I had my heart set on wearing something really special. The casual cruelty of it, discussing wearing my dress to celebrate her engagement to my former boyfriend, required every ounce of self-control I possessed. I'm so sorry, but it's definitely not here, I said after making appropriate searching sounds. Have you checked your spare bedroom closet? Sometimes things get misplaced during moves. I've looked everywhere. This is such a disaster. We spent 20 minutes on the phone, me offering suggestions while she performed increasing levels of distress. The entire conversation was a masterclass in manipulation. She knew I knew she'd taken it and she wanted me to suffer in silence while pretending to help her. But two could play this game. My investigation expanded beyond digital evidence. I began reaching out to old acquaintances, approaching conversations with careful casualness that would have made Layla proud. I was just thinking about you, I told Rebecca Martinez, a former colleague who'd transferred to our Boston office last year. How are you settling in up there? After appropriate catch-up pleasantries, I steered the conversation toward workplace dynamics. It's funny how different office cultures can be, Rebecca said. Like, people here are so direct compared to our old office. Remember how everyone was always worried about stepping on toes? What do you mean? Well, like when your sister reached out to warn people about your situation. Everyone was walking on eggshells around you for months. My grip tightened on the phone. My sister warned people about me? She was just looking out for you. Said you were going through a tough time, dealing with some personal stuff that was affecting your work. She asked us to be patient with you and let her know if we noticed any concerning behavior. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but I heard little beyond the confirmation that Layla's campaign against me had been far more extensive than I'd realized. She'd been painting me as unstable to colleagues across multiple offices, creating a narrative of mental health struggles that explained away my professional difficulties while positioning herself as the devoted sister managing a family crisis. 3 more similar conversations revealed the scope of her character assassination. Former teammates admitted they'd been briefed about my alleged struggles. Clients had received subtle warnings about my reliability framed as family concern. Even my assistant Patricia had been approached with suggestions about how to support me through my difficult period. Each revelation added fuel to the fire burning in my chest. Layla hadn't just sabotaged individual projects. She'd systematically poisoned my professional reputation across the entire industry. The technical preparation phase began that Sunday. I spent the day learning video editing software, practicing until I could seamlessly splice audio clips and create presentations that would display flawlessly under pressure. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using the same technological skills that had made me valuable at Henderson and Associates to orchestrate my sister's downfall. Layla's voice confession became the centerpiece of my presentation. I edited it for maximum impact, removing my friend's responses and combining her most damaging admissions into a 3-minute audio track that painted a devastating portrait of calculated malice. Her laugh, especially, that cruel, delighted sound when she described stealing David as the ultimate prize, would haunt anyone who heard it. I created backup files, tested the audio quality on different speaker systems, and practiced the timing until I could execute the revelation with precision. The presentation included email screenshots, timeline correlations, and the voice recording, all organized to tell the story of betrayal with courtroom-level clarity. The days leading up to her engagement party passed in a strange bubble of calm. I'd expected to feel nervous or angry, but instead experienced an almost zen-like peace. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what was going to happen next. The uncertainty that had plagued me was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence that comes from holding absolute truth. I practiced expressions in my bathroom mirror. The surprised smile when seeing Layla in my dress, the gracious congratulations I'd offer for her engagement, the innocent confusion when technical difficulties began affecting the evening's entertainment. My reflection showed someone I barely recognized. Composed, strategic, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with emotional outbursts or confrontational drama. The woman staring back at me had learned to play Layla's game and I intended to win. Friday evening, I laid out my outfit for the engagement party. A simple black dress that wouldn't compete for attention, modest jewelry that suggested humility rather than celebration. I wanted to appear as the overlooked sister, grateful to be included in such a joyous occasion. In my purse I placed the small remote control that would change everything. The storm had been building for months, but tomorrow night, it would finally break. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes every detail sharp and unforgettable. I drove to the Riverside Manor with my hands steady on the wheel, my heartbeat calm and measured. The venue Layla had chosen was predictably elegant, soaring ceilings, cascading chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. She'd always had impeccable taste when spending other people's money. The valet took my keys with a polite smile, and I walked through the grand entrance carrying my small black purse and the weight of absolute certainty. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted from the main ballroom, punctuated by the gentle hum of a string quartet. Then I saw her. Layla stood in the center of the room like a princess in a fairy tale, surrounded by a circle of admirers who hung on her every word. But it was the dress, my dress, that made my breath catch. The ivory silk flowed around her like liquid moonlight, the delicate lace sleeves catching the chandelier light exactly as I'd dreamed they would. She'd even styled her hair the way I'd planned for my own wedding day, swept up in an elegant chignon with a few strategic curls framing her face. "Doesn't she look absolutely radiant?" Aunt Carol gushed to Cousin Jennifer, their eyes bright with vicarious joy. "That dress could have been made for her." "Divine," Mom agreed, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "I've never seen her look more beautiful." The surreal quality of the moment threatened to overwhelm me. These people, my family, my blood, were celebrating the woman who had systematically dismantled my life, and they were doing it with genuine love and happiness. Their joy wasn't manufactured. They truly believed they were witnessing something magical. David stood beside Layla wearing a navy suit that brought out his eyes, the same eyes that used to light up when he saw me. His smile was radiant as he accepted congratulations and backslaps from family members, playing the role of devoted fiancé with Oscar-worthy conviction. "Sarah." Layla's voice rang out like a bell as she spotted me across the room. "Come meet everyone. They're all dying to hear about how you introduced us." The twisted irony of that statement, making me complicit in my own betrayal, nearly broke my composure. But I'd practiced for this moment. My smile felt natural as I approached the group, my voice warm and sisterly. "You look absolutely stunning, Layla. That dress is perfect on you." "Thank you, sweetheart." I felt so guilty when I found it hanging in the back of my closet. I completely forgot I'd borrowed it for that wedding last month. But when nothing else felt right for tonight. She shrugged helplessly, her performance flawless. The casual rewriting of history, delivered with such convincing sincerity, was masterful. She transformed theft into an innocent misunderstanding, making me complicit in the lie by my silence. "I'm just happy it's getting the appreciation it deserves," I said, meaning every word in ways she couldn't imagine. The evening progressed with typical engagement party rhythms. Speeches about love and destiny, toasts to the happy couple's future, and endless photo opportunities that Layla orchestrated with the precision of a film director. She made sure to include me in several shots, her arm around my shoulders as she smiled for the camera, the picture of sisterly love. "We should do a slideshow presentation," I suggested during a brief lull in the festivities. "I noticed you have that gorgeous photo display system set up. It would be lovely to share some memories of your relationship journey." Mom clapped her hands together. "What a wonderful idea. Sarah, you're so thoughtful." "I'd be happy to set it up," I offered. "I brought my laptop with some photos I thought you might enjoy." Layla's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "That's sweet, but we didn't really plan for." "Nonsense," Dad interrupted, already slightly tipsy from the champagne. "Sarah's brilliant with technology. Let her work her magic." 20 minutes later, I had the projection system configured perfectly. The large screen descended from the ceiling like a theater curtain, commanding attention from every corner of the room. I tested the audio levels, adjusted the brightness, and loaded my files with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent countless hours perfecting this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "If I could have your attention for a special presentation celebrating Layla and David's journey together." The room quieted as guests turned toward the screen. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips, conversations trailing off into expectant silence. Layla stood frozen near the front, her face a mask of polite anticipation that couldn't quite hide the growing alarm in her eyes. The first slide appeared, an email chain between Layla and my former supervisor, dated 3 months ago. The subject line read, "Concerns about Sarah's professional stability." The text was large enough for everyone to read, her words projected in crisp, undeniable clarity. "I'm worried about my sister's recent behavior at work," the email read. "She's been making mistakes that seem out of character, missing deadlines, struggling with basic tasks. I think the pressure might be getting to her." Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. I watched faces transform from celebration to bewilderment as they processed what they were seeing. Aunt Carol squinted at the screen, her champagne glass frozen in midair. "What is this?" Uncle Jim asked, his voice cutting through the growing tension. The slides continued automatically, each one more damaging than the last. Screenshots of fake client complaints Layla had sent to my company. Evidence of her accessing my calendar to sabotage important meetings. Documentation of her spreading rumors about my mental health to colleagues across the industry. Layla's face had drained of all color, the radiant joy replaced by stark horror as she realized what was happening. She lurched toward the projection controls, but Dad caught her arm. "Layla, what is this? What are we looking at?" "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice rising with panic. "This is taken out of context. Sarah's been struggling and I was just trying to help." Her words died as the audio began. The room filled with her own voice, crystal clear through the professional sound system. "Marcus, you won't believe how perfectly this is working out. David is practically eating out of my hand now. I mean, he was Sarah's boyfriend, but that just made it more interesting, you know? Like winning the ultimate prize." The collective gasp was audible. Mom's handkerchief fluttered to the floor as her hand flew to her mouth. David's face went ashen, his eyes fixed on Layla with growing horror. "Of course I feel bad for her," Layla's recorded voice continued, that cruel laugh echoing through the stunned silence. "But honestly, she's always been so pathetically grateful for any scrap of attention from men. It's almost sad how easy this was." "Turn it off," Layla screamed, lunging for the controls again. "Turn it off right now." But no one moved to help her. The family members who had always rushed to her aid stood paralyzed, watching their Golden Girls mask disintegrate in real time. The recording played for another minute, long enough for everyone to hear her describe her systematic sabotage of my career, her calculated seduction of David, her complete lack of remorse for destroying her own sister's life. When it finally ended, the silence was deafening. David approached Layla slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. Without a word, he reached for her left hand. The engagement ring, our grandmother's ring, slipped off her finger and into his palm with barely a whisper of sound. He looked at it for a long moment, then placed it gently on the nearest table. "David, please," Layla whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Let me explain. This isn't what you think." He walked past her without a word, past the shocked family members, past the spilled champagne and abandoned appetizers and out the door. The room erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped in confusion and accusation, family members demanding explanations while Layla sobbed in my wedding dress, her perfect evening crumbling exactly as she had systematically dismantled my life. I stood quietly by the projection controls, watching the scales of justice finally balance themselves, and for the first time in months, I smiled with genuine happiness. The chaos reached a crescendo as Dad's voice boomed over the confused chatter. "Layla, explain this. Now." But Layla was already backing toward the exit, my wedding dress trailing behind her like the remnants of a shattered dream. Her carefully applied makeup streaked down her cheeks in dark rivulets, transforming her from radiant bride-to-be into something tragic and desperate. "This is all lies," she sobbed, gesturing wildly at the screen. "Sarah's sick. She's jealous and she's made all of this up. Can't you see what she's doing?" Mom stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "The voice recording, Layla. That was your voice. It was edited. Manipulated. Sarah's always been good with computers." "Enough." The word came from Grandma Rose, who had been silent until now. Despite her recent stroke, her voice carried the authority of 8 decades. "I raised you better than this." Layla's frantic gaze swept the room, searching for a single face that might show sympathy or belief. Instead, she found only disappointment, shock, and growing understanding. Uncle Jim shook his head slowly. Cousin Jennifer covered her mouth in horror. Even the catering staff had stopped serving, transfixed by the unfolding drama. "You're all turning against me because of her lies," Layla whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. The fight was draining out of her as surely as the color had drained from her face. I walked calmly to the projection controls and switched off the display. The sudden darkness seemed to break whatever spell had held the room frozen. "I think we've seen enough for one evening," I said quietly. Layla fled then, pushing through the crowd in a rustle of stolen silk, leaving behind the engagement ring on the table and the ruins of her carefully constructed life. I watched her go with a sense of completion that felt almost sacred. As the ballroom emptied around me, guests departing in confused clusters, whispering among themselves, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. The weight I'd carried for so long, the constant second-guessing, the crushing self-doubt, it all lifted like fog burning off in morning sunlight. I was free. The next few days brought a parade of difficult conversations. Mom called first, her voice heavy with exhaustion and something that might have been shame. "I owe you an apology," she began without preamble. "Several apologies, actually. I don't know how I missed what was happening. I don't know how I failed you so completely." The conversation lasted 3 hours. Mom cried. I cried. We talked about favoritism and golden children and the damage done by decades of unequal treatment. It wasn't easy, but it was honest in ways our family had never managed before. Dad's apology came in person, delivered in my apartment with tears in his eyes and hands that shook as he spoke. "I taught her that charm could excuse anything," he said. "I rewarded her manipulation because it was pretty and made me feel good about myself as a father. I'm so sorry, sweetheart." The family reckoning continued throughout the week. Aunt Carol admitted she'd always felt something was off about Layla's perfection but had dismissed her instincts. Uncle Jim confessed he'd seen Layla bad-mouthing me at family gatherings but had assumed it was typical sibling rivalry. One by one they came forward with their own pieces of the puzzle, their own moments of uncomfortable clarity they'd chosen to ignore. Grandma Rose's conversation was perhaps the most healing. "I always knew you were the stronger one," she said during her hospital visit. "Layla needed constant praise to function, but you built yourself from the inside out. That takes real character." She removed her engagement ring, the one Layla had worn and abandoned, and pressed it into my palm. "This belongs with someone who understands that love isn't a competition to be won." The professional vindication began with an unexpected phone call. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" The voice was crisp, professional. "This is Catherine Walsh from Sterling and Associates. I believe we need to talk." Sterling and Associates was Henderson's biggest competitor, known for ethical practices and employee loyalty. Catherine had heard about my situation through industry channels. Apparently, Layla's campaign against me had been more transparent than she'd realized to people who knew what to look for. "We've been watching your work for some time," Catherine explained during our lunch meeting. "The Morrison campaign in particular showed remarkable strategic thinking. We always wondered why you weren't advancing at Henderson." Within a month, I had a new job with a salary increase and a team that valued my contributions. Former colleagues from Henderson began reaching out with apologies and explanations. Jessica Chen called to confess that she'd been fed information about my instability that had influenced her treatment of me. "I should have questioned it," she said. "Your work was always stellar." I let personal politics cloud my professional judgment. Marcus Rivera, who'd been promoted over me twice, admitted that Layla had approached him with concerns about my reliability just before his second promotion interview. She made it seem like she was protecting the company from a potential liability. I'm ashamed I believed her. The revelation that my struggles had been artificially created opened doors I'd thought were permanently closed. Project proposals I'd submitted years earlier were suddenly being reconsidered. Clients who'd been told I was unreliable reached out to apologize and explore working together again. But the most profound changes were internal. I started therapy with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in trauma recovery and gaslighting survivors. Our sessions helped me understand the depth of psychological manipulation I'd endured and develop tools for recognizing and countering such behavior in the future. You survived a systematic campaign designed to destroy your sense of reality, Dr. Rodriguez explained during one session. The fact that you were able to gather evidence and fight back shows remarkable resilience and intelligence. Learning to trust my own perceptions again was perhaps the hardest part of recovery. Years of having my reality questioned had left me second-guessing every instinct, every emotion, every decision. Dr. Rodriguez helped me recognize that my instincts had actually been accurate. I had sensed something was wrong even when I couldn't identify the source. The woman who emerged from this process bore little resemblance to the one who had tolerated Layla's cruelty for so long. I learned to set boundaries, to demand respect, to recognize manipulation tactics before they could take root. Most importantly, I learned that I deserved love and success on my own merits, not as consolation prizes distributed by people who felt sorry for me. 18 months later, I met Thomas at a professional conference. He was a consultant specializing in crisis management, drawn to my presentation on rebuilding professional reputation after systematic sabotage. Our first conversation lasted until the hotel bar closed, covering everything from business ethics to favorite books to childhood dreams. You have this amazing strength, he told me during our third date. Not the kind that comes from never being hurt, but the kind that comes from surviving hurt and choosing to keep growing. Our relationship developed slowly, built on honesty and mutual respect rather than desperate need or competitive dynamics. Thomas celebrated my successes without feeling diminished by them. He supported my ambitions without trying to redirect them. Most importantly, he saw me clearly not as a reflection of his own worth, but as a complete person deserving of love. When I bought my new wedding dress, I chose it for me alone. Champagne-colored silk with subtle beading, elegant without being ostentatious, beautiful without being desperate for attention. It represented the woman I'd become rather than the woman I'd hoped someone else might love. The wedding was small, intimate, filled with people who knew my story and celebrated my strength. As I walked down the aisle, I caught sight of Layla in the back row. She'd sent a card requesting permission to attend and I'd granted it. She looked older, quieter, diminished in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance. She was no longer the golden girl commanding every room's attention. She was simply another face in the crowd, and for the first time in our lives, that felt exactly right. The truth had set us both free, though in very different ways. If this story of systematic revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Sarah's voice recording played and the entire room heard Layla's cruel confession about stealing David. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
My name is Rebecca Collins, 32, standing in the pouring rain outside my childhood home. My sister Natalie changed the locks. "You have no right to be here," she said coldly. The eviction notice from her lawyer claimed the house was solely hers. How could the sister I raised after our parents died now treat me like a stranger? I sacrificed my education, my future, everything for her. As water soaked through my clothes, I made a silent promise. This betrayal would not be the end of our story. I still remember the disbelief washing over me that day. If you've ever experienced family betrayal, you know that hollow feeling in your chest. I'd love to know where you're watching from and if you've faced something similar. Hit subscribe if you want to find out how I fought back against my sister's shocking betrayal, and leave a like if you believe family karma eventually comes full circle. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in rural Massachusetts, Natalie and I shared the kind of sisterly bond that seemed unbreakable. Our modest two-story colonial home on Maple Street had been in the family for generations, filled with memories of holiday gatherings and summer barbecues. 8 years my junior, Natalie had always looked up to me with wide, admiring eyes. I was the responsible one, the planner, while she was creative and spontaneous. Despite our differences, we balanced each other perfectly. Everything changed on a rainy October night when I was 19 and Natalie was just 14. The phone call came at 2:17 a.m. I remember staring at the glowing red numbers on my dorm room alarm clock before answering. The police officer's voice was gentle but direct. Our parents' car had hydroplaned on the wet highway, crashing into a guardrail. They died on impact. In that moment, My carefully planned future shattered. I was in my sophomore year at Boston University with a full scholarship in business administration. My dreams had been so clear: graduate, land a job at a prestigious firm, eventually start my own company. But as I sat in the funeral home 3 days later, watching Natalie sob uncontrollably in her black dress that was slightly too big for her slender frame, I knew what I had to do. "I'll defer for a semester," I told my academic advisor the following week. "Take all the time you need," she said, squeezing my hand. "Your scholarship will be waiting." But one semester turned into two, and eventually, I had to make the call. I couldn't leave Natalie. Our only living relative was Aunt Meredith, who lived in Arizona and was battling her own health issues. The thought of Natalie entering the foster system or being uprooted across the country was unthinkable. So I dropped out. The university was understanding, promising my scholarship would be reinstated whenever I returned. I never did. The following years were a blur of exhaustion and responsibility. Our parents had left some life insurance money, but much of it went toward the remainder of the mortgage and maintaining the aging house. I worked as a waitress at Rosie's Diner during the day and took night shifts at the local packaging factory whenever I could. My hands would crack and bleed in the winter from the constant washing of dishes and exposure to cardboard. Through it all, I made sure Natalie had everything she needed. I attended every parent-teacher conference, helped with homework, and stayed up late sewing costumes for school plays. I wanted desperately for her to have a normal teenage experience despite our loss. It wasn't always easy. Natalie went through a rebellious phase at 16, staying out past curfew and hanging out with kids I didn't trust. We had screaming matches that left both of us in tears. "You're not my mother," she shouted during one particularly heated argument. "No, I'm not," I responded, my voice breaking. "But I'm all you've got, and I'm doing my best." That night, I found her curled up in my bed around midnight, her eyes puffy from crying. "I'm sorry, Becca," she whispered. "I know you gave up everything for me." Those moments of connection made all the sacrifices worthwhile. My own social life had dwindled to nearly nothing. Dating was complicated. How do you explain to potential partners that you're essentially a parent in your early 20s? My few remaining friends from high school gradually stopped calling as our lives diverged. While they were graduating college and starting careers, I was attending Natalie's softball games and working double shifts. When Natalie was accepted to the University of Massachusetts with a partial scholarship, I couldn't have been prouder. We sat at our kitchen table, the acceptance letter between us, and I reached for her hand. "Mom and Dad would be so proud of you," I said. "They'd be proud of both of us," Natalie replied, squeezing my fingers. "This is because of you, Becca. I wouldn't be here without you." We never formally discussed the ownership of the house. In my mind, it belonged to both of us equally, though I handled all the bills and maintenance. The mortgage was finally paid off using the last of the insurance money when Natalie started college, which eased our financial burden somewhat. Still, I continued working multiple jobs to cover property taxes and utilities while also helping with Natalie's remaining tuition costs. It was during Natalie's junior year that she met Kenneth Preston. She brought him home for Thanksgiving. A tall, well-dressed business major with perfectly styled hair and an expensive watch. He came from money. That much was obvious from his cashmere sweater and the brand-new Audi he parked in our driveway. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Rebecca," he said, offering a firm handshake. "Natalie talks about you constantly. What you've done for her is remarkable." I warmed to him initially, appreciating how he looked at my sister with genuine affection. But there were moments that gave me pause. When I served the turkey, slightly overcooked after my double shift at the diner, he made a comment about his mother's personal chef. When Natalie mentioned my plan to eventually return to college, he asked, "At your age," with subtle condescension. Still, Natalie seemed happy, and that was what mattered most to me. If I noticed how she started to adopt his mannerisms, his opinions, his view of the world, I told myself it was normal. If I felt a pang when she began spending holidays with his family in their Cape Cod vacation home instead of with me, I suppressed it. "Kenneth says I need to start networking with the right people," she explained when she called to say she wouldn't be home for Christmas, our first apart since our parents died. His father knows the dean of Harvard Law School. Of course, I said, swallowing my disappointment. That makes sense. I spent that Christmas working a double shift at the diner and fell asleep on the couch watching It's a Wonderful Life alone, trying not to feel the emptiness of the house. For years passed after Natalie graduated from law school. The sister who once shared everything with me had become increasingly distant, transformed by Kenneth's influence and her new professional identity. Her wardrobe of comfy sweaters and jeans had been replaced with tailored suits and designer shoes. Her once wild curly hair was now straightened and cut into a severe bob that Kenneth said looked more professional. The first time I noticed something was wrong was when Natalie referred to our family home as my house during a phone call with one of her new colleagues from the prestigious Boston law firm where she'd landed a position immediately after passing the bar. Yes, I'll host the partners' dinner at my house next month, she said, pacing the living room while I washed dishes. She caught my questioning look and quickly amended, our house, I mean. But the slip happened again and again. Meanwhile, Kenneth's presence in our home increased, along with his opinions about everything from the outdated kitchen cabinets to the inefficient heating system. You really should consider a complete renovation, he told Natalie one evening while I sat quietly at the dinner table I had refinished myself years ago. This place is good bones, but it's stuck in the last century. The house is character, I defended gently. And renovations are expensive. Sometimes you have to spend money to add value, Kenneth replied with a dismissive wave. Natalie deserves to live somewhere that reflects her success. I bit my tongue, remembering how I'd painted every room in this house myself, how I'd learned to fix the plumbing when we couldn't afford a professional, how every scratch and dent held a memory of our family. When Kenneth proposed to Natalie after 2 years of dating, the engagement ring was ostentatious, a diamond so large it looked uncomfortable on my sister's slender finger. The wedding plans quickly spiraled into an extravagant affair at a historic mansion in Newport, Rhode Island. Kenneth's parents are covering most of it, Natalie assured me when I expressed concern about the cost. But I'd like to contribute to the flower arrangements. It's only $5,000. I winced at the figure but nodded. I'd been saving for years to return to school, but Natalie's happiness came first. It always had. I picked up extra shifts and dipped into my modest savings to help with not just the flowers, but also her designer dress when Kenneth's mother deemed her original choice too simple. The wedding day itself was beautiful, but alienating. I found myself relegated to the background despite being the maid of honor. Kenneth's mother took charge, positioning her family prominently in photos while I was often asked to step aside. During the reception, Natalie spent mere minutes at my table, surrounded by her new law school friends and Kenneth's business associates. You look beautiful, I told her during one brief moment together. Thanks for everything, Becca, she said, squeezing my hand before being whisked away by Kenneth's father for another introduction to someone important. The honeymoon was initially planned as a 2-week tour of the Greek islands. 2 days before they were set to return, I received a brief text, extending trip for another month. Kenneth surprised me. Can you keep handling the house stuff? I continued maintaining our home, paying all the bills from my waitressing job while also covering the property taxes that came due during their absence. When they finally returned 6 weeks later, Natalie barely unpacked before returning to her demanding job at the firm. One afternoon, while Natalie was at work and Kenneth was at a business lunch, I was cleaning their room, something I still did despite working full-time myself. As I dusted Natalie's desk, a legal document slipped from a folder. I wouldn't have thought much of it, except that I saw our address printed at the top. Curiosity and concern prompted me to look closer. It was a consultation summary from a property attorney, outlining options for clarifying sole ownership of our family home. My hands trembled as I read further. The document referenced removing long-term residents without ownership claims and strategies to minimize legal exposure. When Natalie returned that evening, I confronted her, the document in hand. "What is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She snatched it from me, her face flushing. "You went through my things?" I was cleaning and it fell out. Natalie, are you trying to force me out of her home? Don't be dramatic, she said, tucking the paper into her briefcase. It's just a consultation. I'm a lawyer now. I'm exploring all our options for the future. Options for what? This is our house. Both of ours. Is it? She countered, her voice taking on the crisp, professional tone she used with clients. Your name isn't on the deed, Rebecca. I've been looking into it. Because I was 19 when our parents died. We were focused on survival, not paperwork. But you know they would have wanted it for both of us. Kenneth walked in then, placing a proprietary hand on Natalie's shoulder. Everything okay here? Just a misunderstanding, Natalie said quickly. Rebecca thinks I'm trying to kick her out or something ridiculous. That's absurd, Kenneth laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Family is family. Later that night, I heard them whispering in their bedroom, Kenneth's voice low and insistent. When I passed Natalie in the hallway the next morning, she assured me I was overreacting. You're being paranoid, Becca. I would never do that to you. You're my sister. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. So I pushed down my concerns and convinced myself I had misinterpreted the document, that Natalie would never betray me after all we'd been through together. But in the following weeks, I noticed small changes. Kenneth began referring to future renovation plans with "when it's just us" slipped in casually. Natalie started making comments about how I deserved my own space and how independence would be good for me. They hosted dinner parties with Kenneth's colleagues where I felt distinctly unwelcome, like a house guest who had overstayed. I began to feel like a stranger in the home I had maintained for over a decade. The home where I had nursed Natalie through the flu, where I had taught her to drive in our snowy driveway, where I had held her through breakups and celebrated her accomplishments. The home that contained every memory of our life together and every echo of our parents. 6 months after discovering the legal document, I was offered a rare opportunity, a week-long training program in Chicago that could lead to a management position at a new restaurant opening in our town. It would mean better pay, regular hours, and benefits, something I'd never had in my patchwork of jobs. I hesitated to leave Natalie and Kenneth alone in the house, but my suspicions had faded with time as nothing further had happened. You should definitely go, Natalie encouraged with unexpected enthusiasm. You deserve this opportunity. Throughout my trip, Natalie texted frequently with unusual questions. What time exactly does your flight land on Saturday? Will you be taking a taxi straight home? Are you sure you're not coming back Friday instead? I attributed her questions to sisterly concern, though a nagging feeling persisted. On Friday morning, I received an email that the final day of training had been canceled due to the instructor's illness. With a chance to return home early, I decided to surprise Natalie. I didn't call ahead, imagining her pleased reaction to having an extra evening together. Maybe we could order pizza and watch a movie like we used to. The taxi dropped me off around 4 p.m., and I was wheeling my suitcase up the driveway when I noticed an unfamiliar van parked out front with "Boston Security Solutions" printed on the side. As I approached the porch, I saw 2 men in uniforms working on our front door. One was removing our old brass doorknob while the other held what looked like a new electronic lock system. "Excuse me," I called out. "What's going on here?" "Home security upgrade, ma'am," one replied without looking up. But I didn't order. I stopped mid-sentence as the front door opened and Natalie appeared, her expression changing from direction to shock when she saw me. "Rebecca, you're supposed to be in Chicago until tomorrow." The last day was canceled. "What's happening here, Natalie?" Before she could answer, Kenneth appeared behind her, placing his hand on her shoulder in that now familiar controlling gesture. "You're early," he said flatly. "Why are you changing the locks?" I asked, a cold dread spreading through my chest. Natalie straightened her posture, and I recognized her courtroom stance, feet planted firmly, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. "Rebecca, we need to talk. Kenneth and I have made some decisions about the house." "What decisions?" I asked, though I already knew. The pieces were falling into place. Their questions about my exact return time, the strange tension of the past months, the document I'd found. "I've consulted with several attorneys," Natalie continued, her voice detached and professional. The house legally belongs to me. It always has. That's not true, I protested, rain beginning to fall around us, fat drops that quickly intensified. Mom and Dad left it to both of us. Actually, they didn't, Kenneth interjected, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. The deed transferred solely to Natalie upon your parents' death. As the legal owner, she's exercising her right to determine who lives here. Show me these documents, I demanded, rain now soaking through my light jacket. Natalie disappeared inside and returned with a folder, handing me several papers. I squinted at them through the rain, trying to make sense of the legal jargon. One document appeared to be our parents' will, but something looked wrong. I remembered seeing the will years ago, after the funeral. This version seemed altered. This isn't right, I said, looking up at my sister's impassive face. This isn't the original will. It's the official filed version, Natalie replied coldly. I'm sorry, Rebecca, but you need to find somewhere else to live. We've been more than generous allowing you to stay rent-free all these years. Rent-free? I echoed in disbelief. I paid the mortgage. I covered the property taxes. I maintained this house while you were at college. Without any legal obligation to do so, Kenneth added. Consider it your rent for the time you've lived here. I stood there, rain plastering my hair to my face, unable to comprehend how the sister I had sacrificed everything for could do this to me. My things, I began. We'll arrange for you to collect essential items at a scheduled time, Natalie interrupted. With supervision, of course. Supervision? I've lived here my entire life. And now you don't, Kenneth said bluntly. Your suitcase from your trip should tide you over until arrangements can be made. I became aware of our neighbors watching from their windows and porches. The Hendersons, who had brought casseroles after our parents died. Mr. Finley, who had taught me how to fix the furnace when it broke during Natalie's senior year of high school. All witnessing my humiliation, my sister's betrayal. Natalie, please, I said, my voice breaking. This is our home. Our parents' home. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, doubt, regret, pain, but Kenneth's hand tightened on her shoulder and her expression hardened again. Not anymore, she said. Goodbye, Rebecca. The door closed. The locksmiths continued their work, avoiding my eyes. I stood in the pouring rain, my childhood home now barred to me, the sister I raised now a stranger. With nowhere else to go, I called my friend Lauren from the diner. She lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, but immediately offered her couch. I arrived at her door soaking wet, still in shock. Rebecca, what happened? She asked, wrapping a towel around my shoulders. I couldn't even form the words. How do you explain that the person you sacrificed your future for has thrown you away? 3 days later, while staying at Lauren's apartment and sleeping on her uncomfortable couch, I received an envelope from Cartwright, Sullivan & Hayes, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. Inside was a formal eviction notice, claiming I was a tenant at will, who had failed to pay proper rent, and demanding I stay away from the property except for one supervised visit to collect personal belongings. But the most devastating discovery came when I examined the attached documents more carefully. Among them was a paper I vaguely remembered signing years ago, right after our parents' death, when I was overwhelmed with funeral arrangements and becoming Natalie's guardian. She had told me it was routine insurance paperwork that needed my signature. In reality, it was a document relinquishing any claim to our parents' estate, including the house. I sank to the floor of Lauren's tiny bathroom, the only place I could find privacy, and finally allowed myself to break down completely. My body shook with sobs as I thought of everything I had given up for Natalie, my education, my career opportunities, my youth. I had worked multiple jobs with bleeding hands and aching feet to keep a roof over our heads, to put food on the table, to give her the chance to succeed. And now I was homeless, betrayed by the very person I had sacrificed everything for. The first week after being locked out of my home passed in a fog of grief and disbelief. I continued going to work at the diner, mechanically serving plates and refilling coffee cups while my mind replayed Natalie's cold expression as she closed the door on me. Customers who knew me noticed something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How could I admit that my own sister had thrown me onto the street? Lauren was endlessly supportive, insisting I stay with her as long as needed, but her apartment was tiny. I slept on her lumpy couch, my feet hanging off the end, and kept my meager possessions in my suitcase. I felt like a burden, an intruder in her space, despite her protests to the contrary. On the 8th day of my exile, I broke down during my shift when a family came in. A mother and 2 daughters who reminded me of my parents and Natalie and me in happier times. I fled to the bathroom, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the faucet to splash cold water on my face. "This can't go on, Rebecca," Lauren said that evening, finding me staring blankly at the wall. "You need to fight back."
How?
I asked, my voice hollow. "She's a lawyer. She has connections, money. I'm a waitress with a high school diploma." "My cousin Ethan is a property attorney," Lauren replied, already reaching for her phone. "Not one of those fancy Boston types, but he knows his stuff. Let me call him." 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Ethan Hayes in his modest office above a hardware store in the next town over. He was younger than I expected, with kind eyes and a reassuring manner that put me at ease despite my anxiety. "Tell me everything," he said, pushing a box of tissues toward me. "Don't leave anything out." For nearly 2 hours, I poured out the whole story: our parents' death, my sacrifice of college and career to raise Natalie, the years of financial struggle, Kenneth's appearance and influence, and finally, the betrayal. Ethan took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Did you bring the documents they served you with?" he asked when I finished. I handed over the folder containing the eviction notice, the altered will, and the paper I had unwittingly signed years ago. Ethan examined each carefully, his brow furrowing. "Rebecca," he said finally, looking up, "I know this is hard, but I need to ask, do you want to fight your sister over this?" I hesitated. Despite everything, Natalie was my only family. The thought of a legal battle against her made my stomach churn. "I don't want to hurt her," I admitted. "But that house is as much mine as it is hers. I put my whole life into it, into us. It's all I have left of our parents." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then we have work to do. This situation isn't as clear-cut in their favor as they want you to believe." Over the next week, Ethan and I built my case. He explained that despite the paper I had signed, which was indeed problematic, I had several strong legal arguments on my side. "You've established years of mortgage payments, property tax contributions, and home maintenance," he explained, spreading receipts and bank statements across his desk. "This creates what's called a constructive trust in some jurisdictions. Essentially, your actions and financial contributions demonstrate an ownership interest regardless of whose name is on the deed." He also pointed out that my sacrifice of education and career to raise Natalie could constitute a form of contract. "You gave up your scholarship and future earnings based on the understanding that you were preserving your shared family home," he said. "That's consideration in legal terms. Your sister benefited enormously from your sacrifice." I felt a flutter of hope for the first time since being locked out. "So I have a case?" "You do," Ethan confirmed. "But we need more evidence. Witnesses who can testify to your role in raising Natalie, your understanding about the house, and any statements Natalie may have made over the years acknowledging your shared ownership." This sent me on a mission, contacting neighbors, family friends, and even Natalie's former teachers who had witnessed my role as her caretaker. Many were shocked by what had happened and eager to help. Mrs. Donovan, Natalie's high school English teacher, recalled a college application essay Natalie had written about how I had sacrificed everything to keep our family together in our beloved home. Mr. Finley, our elderly neighbor, not only agreed to testify, but also reminded me of something I had completely forgotten. "What about your parents' safe deposit box?" he asked during our conversation. "Harold mentioned it to me once, said that's where they kept all their important documents. The memory hit me like a thunderbolt. Dad had indeed maintained a safe deposit box at Brookfield Community Bank. In the chaos following their deaths, with funeral arrangements and becoming Natalie's guardian, I had completely forgotten about it. The next morning, I presented myself at the bank, heart pounding. After verifying my identity and confirming I was listed as an authorized user, the bank manager escorted me to the vault. The small metal box contained exactly what we needed: the original, unaltered copies of my parents' will, which clearly stated that the house was to be shared equally between Natalie and me. "This changes everything," Ethan said when I showed him the documents. "The will they presented must have been altered. That's fraud, Rebecca." With this evidence, Ethan helped me file a countersuit against Natalie, claiming fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and emotional distress. We also filed for an emergency injunction to prevent her from selling or further modifying the property while our case proceeded. But perhaps the most surprising discovery came when Ethan hired a financial investigator to look into Kenneth's background. Far from the wealthy, successful businessman he portrayed himself to be, Kenneth was deeply in debt. He had been sued twice by former business partners, had a history of failed ventures, and was currently facing a tax audit. "I think I understand the urgency now," Ethan said grimly. Based on these findings, Kenneth likely pushed Natalie to secure sole ownership of the house so they could sell it or take out a substantial equity loan to solve his financial problems. The pieces were falling into place. Kenneth had targeted Natalie, seeing not just an attractive, intelligent woman but also a potential path to property and financial security. He had methodically isolated her from me, the one person who might have seen through his facade, and manipulated her insecurities to turn her against me. As our legal preparations continued, I experienced a profound shift in my emotions. The initial shock and hurt began to transform into determination and righteous anger. This was not just about a house, it was about justice, about not allowing Kenneth to steal my sacrifice along with my home. If you've ever had that moment when grief turns to resolve, when you finally decide that enough is enough, you know exactly what I felt. It's like finding solid ground after drowning. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've experienced something similar, that turning point when you decided to fight back against injustice, especially from family. Sometimes the hardest battles are against the people we love the most. 2 months into our legal battle, with motions filed and preliminary hearings scheduled, I decided to look through the remaining contents of my parents' safe deposit box more thoroughly. Beyond the will, there were insurance policies, birth certificates, and several sealed envelopes I hadn't opened during my first visit. One Saturday afternoon in Lauren's apartment, I spread the contents across her coffee table and began methodically examining each document. Most were what I expected. Financial records, warranty deeds, my mother's modest jewelry inventory for insurance purposes. But then I came across a sealed envelope marked Natalie, private, in my mother's handwriting. I stared at it, conflicted. It was addressed to Natalie, not me. But we were in the middle of a legal battle, and anything relevant to our family history could be important. After several minutes of internal debate, I carefully opened it. Inside was a birth certificate. Not the one I was familiar with, but an original one from a county in upstate New York, not Massachusetts. The parents listed weren't our parents. And there was a formal adoption decree, finalizing the adoption of baby girl Bennett by Harold and Eleanor Collins, our parents. My hands trembled as the realization hit me. Natalie was adopted. This was a secret our parents had kept from both of us. I had no idea, and I suspected strongly that Natalie didn't know either. Included was a letter from my mother, dated shortly before their fatal accident, addressed to Natalie on her 18th birthday. It was sealed separately with a note on the envelope, to be given to Natalie when she turns 18 or earlier if circumstances require. I didn't open this more personal letter. Whatever words my mother had written to explain this revelation to Natalie were for her eyes only. But the implication was clear. Our parents had intended to tell her about her adoption when she became an adult. Their unexpected death had prevented this truth from coming to light. I immediately called my parents' oldest friend, my Aunt Martha, not a biological aunt, but my mother's best friend since childhood who had always been aunt to us. I drove to her home that evening, documents in hand. Martha's face fell as soon as she saw what I had discovered. "I wondered if this would ever come up," she said softly, inviting me in. Over tea at her kitchen table, Martha confirmed what the documents revealed. My parents had struggled with infertility for years before having me. After I was born, they tried for a second child but couldn't conceive again. When I was 8, they adopted Natalie as a newborn. They loved her instantly and completely, Martha assured me. There was never any difference in how they felt about either of you. They were planning to tell her after she graduated high school, thought she'd be mature enough then to understand. "Why didn't you tell us after they died?" I asked, not accusingly, just confused. Martha sighed heavily. "I thought about it many times. But you were both so devastated, and you were taking on so much responsibility, Rebecca. I didn't want to add another emotional burden. As time passed, it never seemed like the right moment."
"I'm sorry."
As I drove back to Lauren's apartment, memories flooded back. Strange comments from relatives that had confused me at the time but now made perfect sense. Great Aunt Judith remarking on how Natalie didn't have the Collins nose. Uncle Robert's drunken comment at a family reunion about Natalie being chosen specially. The absence of Natalie's birth story in our family lore when mine was recounted in detail. I now faced an agonizing dilemma. Should I use this information in our legal case? Would revealing this secret help me regain my home? And more importantly, was it right to use such a personal, potentially devastating revelation as a legal weapon against my sister? I brought the adoption documents to Ethan the next day, explaining my concerns. "Legally, this doesn't change much," he said after reviewing them. "Adoption creates the same inheritance rights as biological children. But psychologically..." He trailed off, understanding the implications. "I can't use this to hurt her," I decided. "Whatever she's done, however Kenneth has manipulated her, I won't use this to wound her." Ethan nodded respectfully. "We have strong enough evidence without it. But Rebecca, there's something else to consider. If I found these documents during standard discovery processes, Kenneth's lawyers might have as well. This possibility hadn't occurred to me, and it sent a chill down my spine. What if Kenneth already knew? What if he was using this knowledge to further manipulate Natalie? The answer came a week later, during a scheduled deposition. Kenneth was being questioned about his financial interest in the property when he made a snide remark. "It's not like she's even a real Collins. The house should go to actual family." The room went silent. His lawyer looked mortified, immediately calling for a break. But the damage was done. Kenneth knew about the adoption and had clearly been using it against Natalie. After the deposition, Ethan and I pieced together what must have happened. During their preparation to claim the house, Kenneth or his attorneys had likely discovered the adoption records. Instead of sharing this information compassionately with Natalie, Kenneth had weaponized it, using it to deepen her insecurity about her place in the family and fuel her desperate grab for the house as proof of belonging. This revelation cast Natalie's actions in a new light. While it didn't excuse her betrayal, it helped explain it. She wasn't just a villain in this story. She was also a victim of Kenneth's manipulation, her identity thrown into crisis by a truth revealed in the worst possible way by someone exploiting her vulnerability. Through further investigation, we discovered that Natalie had been seeing a therapist specializing in adoption issues for the past 6 months, right around the time they must have discovered the records. She had been struggling with this knowledge in silence, guided by Kenneth's twisted narrative that I, as the biological child, had more right to our parents' love and home than she did. As our court date approached, I knew I needed to speak with Natalie alone, away from Kenneth's influence. I needed her to know that I was aware of the adoption, but that it changed nothing about our sisterhood in my eyes. That our parents had loved her completely. That the house was meant for both of us, regardless of biology. I thought of all the moments we had shared in that house, teaching her to bake cookies in our kitchen, helping her get ready for prom in the upstairs bathroom, comforting her through her first heartbreak in the living room. Our bond had been forged through shared experiences, love, and sacrifice, not blood.
She needed to know that.
But reaching Natalie proved nearly impossible. Kenneth had effectively isolated her, screening her calls and accompanying her everywhere. My attempts to contact her directly were met with cease and desist letters from their attorneys. Finally, I decided on a different approach. I would meet her in a place Kenneth wouldn't expect, a place tied to our shared history rather than legal battles. Growing up, whenever Natalie and I needed to have a serious conversation or celebrate a special moment, we would go to Millie's Diner on the edge of town. It was where we'd gone the day after our parents' funeral, where we'd celebrated her college acceptance, where I'd treated her to breakfast before her first day of law school. It was our place.
I sent a simple text, Mies.
Tuesday, 3 p.m. Remember Mom's apple pie? Please come alone. Just talk, no lawyers. I wasn't sure she would come. For all I knew, Kenneth monitored her phone. But Tuesday at 2:55 p.m., I sat in our usual booth by the window, nervously shredding a napkin, hoping against hope. At exactly 3 o'clock, the bell above the door jingled, and Natalie walked in. My heart clenched at the sight of her. She looked thinner than when I'd last seen her, with dark circles under her eyes visible even beneath careful makeup. She was impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, but her posture was rigid with tension. Her eyes scanned the diner until they found me. For a moment, she hesitated, and I feared she might turn and leave. But then she walked over and slid into the booth across from me. "You came," I said softly. "I told Kenneth I had a client meeting," she replied, her voice clipped and professional. "I have 30 minutes. Old Millie herself shuffled over, her face lighting up at seeing us together. "The Collins girls. It's been too long since I've seen you both here. The usual?" Before Natalie could object, I nodded. "Yes, please. 2 slices of apple pie and coffee." After Millie moved away, an uncomfortable silence fell between us. Natalie wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at her perfectly manicured nails. "How are you?" I finally asked. "Let's not pretend this is a social call, Rebecca," she replied coldly. "What do you want? Our attorneys should be handling all communication. I'm not here as your legal opponent. I'm here as your sister," I said gently. "And I think we need to talk about what Kenneth found in the adoption records." Natalie's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "You know, I found the original documents in Mom and Dad's safe deposit box. There was a letter from Mom to you for when you turned 18. I didn't read it, it's sealed. It's yours." I reached into my purse and slid the envelope across the table. Natalie stared at it, her hand trembling slightly as she picked it up. "Kenneth told me you'd always known. That everyone had kept it from just me." My heart broke at the pain in her voice. "That's not true. I had no idea until a few weeks ago. Mom and Dad were planning to tell you after high school graduation, but then the accident." "So it's true? I'm not really a Collins." Her voice was barely audible. "You are absolutely a Collins," I said firmly. "Mom and Dad chose you. They wanted you specifically. They loved you completely. Being adopted doesn't change who you are or your place in our family." Millie returned with our pie and coffee, beaming at us. "Just like old times," she said before bustling away. The familiar sight of apple pie with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting on top, our comfort food through countless childhood conversations, seemed to crack something in Natalie's carefully maintained facade. "Kenneth said," she began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "He said you resented raising me. That you only did it because you had to, not because you wanted to. That you blamed me for ruining your life." "Oh, Natalie," I whispered, fighting back tears. That couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, it was hard sometimes. Yes, there were moments I wished things could have been different for both of us. But I never, ever regretted choosing to be there for you. Not for a single day. But you gave up everything, college, your career, your future. "I gave up some opportunities," I corrected her, "and gained others. I got to see you grow up. I got to be there for your first date, your high school graduation, your college acceptance. Those moments meant everything to me." Tears welled in Natalie's eyes. Kenneth convinced me that you'd never really loved me as a sister. That you'd feel relieved if I took the burden of sharing the house off your hands. She laughed bitterly. He said I was doing you a favor by forcing you to move on with your life. And you believed him? I asked, not accusingly, just trying to understand. He can be very convincing, she admitted, looking down. And I was vulnerable after finding out about the adoption. It made me question everything. Who I was. Where I belonged. You belong with me, I said simply. You're my sister, blood or not. Natalie's composure finally crumbled. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she confessed the full extent of Kenneth's manipulation. He found the adoption records 6 months ago. He told me we shouldn't tell you that we knew that you might use it against me legally. She wiped her eyes. Then he started planting doubts, pointing out how you and Mom had the same eyes, how you and Dad had the same laugh. Things I'd never even thought about before. As she spoke, the full picture emerged. Kenneth had methodically isolated Natalie, first from me, then from our old friends and neighbors. He'd interpreted every action and memory through a distorted lens, recasting my sacrifices as obligations and my love as duty. He'd convinced her that securing sole ownership of the house was the only way to cement her place in the Collins family. He's planning to sell it, she admitted, her voice breaking, as soon as the court case is resolved. He says we need the capital for his new business venture. Sell our home. I was stunned despite everything. The house we grew up in? Where all our memories of Mom and Dad are? Natalie nodded miserably. He's already talking to realtors. I tried to object, but he says I'm being sentimental and impractical. I reached across the table and took her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. Natalie, there's something else you need to know. Kenneth isn't who he pretends to be. Our attorney investigated his finances. He's deeply in debt. He has failed businesses and lawsuits against him. She didn't look as surprised as I'd expected. I've suspected something was wrong, she admitted. There have been strange calls, letters he hides from me. He's been increasingly desperate about getting full control of the house. She hesitated, then added in a whisper. And he has gambling debts. I found receipts from casinos, loans from people I've never heard of. Is that why you've lost so much weight? Why you look so exhausted? I asked gently. Natalie's eyes filled with tears again. He gets angry when things don't go his way. He doesn't hit me, she quickly added, seeing my expression. But the yelling, the cold silences, the subtle threats about my career, my future. That's still abuse, Nat, I said, using her childhood nickname for the first time in years. She nodded slowly, as if finally accepting this truth. I don't know how to get out, she whispered. He knows everything about me, all my weaknesses. And now he has legal control over our house. I squeezed her hand. Not necessarily. I took out copies of the original will and my financial records. Look at these. Mom and Dad left the house to both of us equally. And I've been making mortgage payments and covering taxes for years. We have a strong case, Natalie. She examined the documents, her lawyer's mind clearly processing the implications. These would invalidate everything Kenneth's been building, she said slowly. We don't have to be enemies in this, I told her. We could present a united front, get the house back in both our names, as our parents intended. Hope flickered in her eyes, but fear quickly followed. Kenneth will be furious. You don't have to face him alone, I promised. We'll do it together, like we've done everything else. For the first time, Natalie gave me a genuine smile. Small and tremulous, but real. I've missed you, Becca. I've missed you too, Nat. We spent the next 20 minutes formulating a plan. Natalie would gather evidence of Kenneth's financial deception and emotional abuse. We would meet with Ethan together to consolidate our legal strategy. And most immediately, we would return to the house to confront Kenneth with the truth. Are you sure about going back today? I asked as we left the diner. We could wait, prepare more. No, Natalie said with newfound determination. I need to do this now before I lose my courage. And I want you with me when I tell him it's over. We drove separately to the house, our house. As we walked up the driveway together, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and homecoming. This place had been my anchor through everything, and now I was fighting to reclaim it alongside the sister I'd feared I'd lost forever. Kenneth's car was in the driveway. Natalie used her key to open the door, and I followed her inside, my heart pounding at being back in these familiar rooms after months of exile. "Natalie? Is that you?" Kenneth's voice came from the study, our father's old study, which he had claimed as his own. "Yes," she called back. "And Rebecca is with me." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a chair scraping across the floor. Kenneth appeared in the doorway, his expression cycling rapidly from confusion to shock to calculated anger. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. "She's violating the restraining order." "There is no valid restraining order, Kenneth," Natalie replied, her voice steadier than I'd expected. "And this is her home, too." Kenneth's face darkened as he registered our united front. "I see. Had a little sisterly chat, did you? Bonding over being orphans." His voice dripped with contempt. "Careful, Natalie. Only one of you is a real Collins." "That's where you're wrong," I interjected. "Family isn't about blood. It's about love and commitment. Something you wouldn't understand." "How touching," he sneered. "But legally meaningless. This house belongs to my wife, and you're trespassing." "Actually," Natalie said, stepping forward, "I've reviewed all the documentation. The original will left the house to both of us equally. And Rebecca has equity through years of mortgage payments and property tax contributions." Kenneth's smirk faltered slightly. "Your signature says otherwise. The documents are filed and finalized. Documents that may have been obtained through fraud and misrepresentation," Natalie countered, her legal training evident in her precise language, "which would make them voidable under state law." Kenneth's calculated facade began to crack. "You're choosing her over me? Your husband? For what? A rundown house and some sentimental garbage about sisterhood?" "I'm choosing truth over lies," Natalie replied steadily. "I'm choosing the sister who sacrificed everything for me over the husband who manipulated and isolated me." "You ungrateful bitch," Kenneth snarled, his charming mask completely gone now. "After everything I've done for you? I made you who you are." "No," I said firmly. "She made herself who she is, with the foundation our parents gave her and the support I tried to provide. You just try to take credit for it." Kenneth's face contorted with rage. He took a threatening step toward Natalie. "You're nothing without me. You think your fancy law firm will keep you once I tell them what an emotional wreck you are? How you've been seeing a therapist because you can't handle knowing you're just some unwanted baby your parents picked up." I moved protectively toward my sister, but Natalie stood her ground. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Kenneth," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "And I want you out of our house. Today." "You can't do this to me," he shouted, desperation now mingling with his anger. "I have plans for this property. I have commitments." "Gambling debts, you mean?" Natalie asked quietly. "Loans from people I don't want to know?" "I found everything, Kenneth. The hidden bank statements, the threatening letters, the second phone. It's over." For a moment, I thought Kenneth might become violent. His hands clenched into fists, and his entire body trembled with rage. But then, perhaps remembering that there were two of us and that the neighbors might hear, he forced a cold laugh.
Fine.
"Have your pathetic sisterly reunion. But this isn't over. I'll be contacting my attorneys immediately." "I already contacted mine," Natalie replied. "They'll be serving you with divorce papers tomorrow. And a restraining order, a real one." Kenneth glared at both of us, then stormed upstairs. We could hear him throwing things into suitcases, cursing loudly. Natalie and I remained in the living room, side by side, neither of us speaking but drawing strength from each other's presence. 20 minutes later, Kenneth came downstairs with 2 suitcases. He paused at the door for one final, venomous comment. "You'll regret this, Natalie. Both of you will." Then he was gone, the door slamming behind him with a finality that seemed to release the tension that had been holding us rigid. Natalie turned to me, and without a word, we fell into each other's arms, both of us crying, for what we had lost, for what we had found again, and for the long road of healing that lay ahead. 1 year later, a little to the left, I called out, gesturing with my paint-splattered hands. "That's perfect." Natalie adjusted the framed photo on the freshly painted wall of our living room, a picture of the four of us, Mom, Dad, Natalie, and me, taken during our last family vacation to Cape Cod. Below it hung a smaller frame containing a faded crayon drawing Natalie had made in elementary school, labeled "My Family" in wobbly letters. "What do you think?" she asked, stepping back to admire our work. "I think Mom and Dad would love what we've done with the place," I replied honestly. In the year since Kenneth's departure, we had transformed our family home. Gone was the cold, modernist furniture he had insisted upon, replaced with warm, comfortable pieces that reflected our shared taste. We had painted the walls together, refinished the hardwood floors ourselves, and planted a garden of our mother's favorite flowers in the backyard. More importantly, we had rebuilt our relationship, stronger than before. The legal battle with Kenneth had been difficult and draining, but ultimately successful. With the evidence Natalie provided about his financial deceptions and the original will from the safe deposit box, we were able to invalidate the fraudulent documents and restore joint ownership of the house to both of us. Kenneth hadn't gone quietly. He had fought viciously through his attorneys, even attempting to claim part of the house in the divorce settlement. But his position crumbled when his gambling debts came to light during discovery, along with evidence that he had misappropriated funds from his law firm's clients. He eventually agreed to a settlement that left him no claim to our home, in exchange for Natalie not pursuing criminal charges for the financial improprieties she had discovered. Last we heard, he had moved to Nevada to escape his creditors, leaving a trail of broken promises and unpaid debts behind him. Natalie's divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. The process had been painful but liberating for her. She had taken a leave of absence from her high-pressure law firm, using the time to recover and reassess her priorities. When she returned to work, it was at a nonprofit legal aid center specializing in adoption rights and family law, where she now helped other adoptees navigate the complex emotions and legal questions surrounding their identities. "I never thought I'd say this," she admitted one evening as we shared dinner at our restored kitchen table, "but I'm actually grateful the truth about my adoption came out. Not the way it happened," she clarified, "but knowing who I am has made me feel more complete, not less." She had read our mother's letter countless times, a beautiful, loving explanation of how desperately our parents had wanted her, how they had chosen her specifically, how they had planned to tell her when she was mature enough to understand that being adopted made her more precious, not less, because she had been so explicitly wanted and chosen. With my encouragement, Natalie had even decided to search for her birth mother. It had been a long process with many emotional ups and downs, but 3 months ago, they had finally met, a tearful, healing reunion that answered many of Natalie's questions about her origins. Her birth mother, Angela, had been a 17-year-old girl unable to care for a baby, but desperate to ensure her child found a loving home. Learning that Natalie had indeed grown up loved and now had a successful career and strong relationship with her adoptive sister had brought Angela profound peace. As for me, I had finally returned to college, taking evening classes at the local community college with the goal of eventually completing my business degree. The scholarship was long gone, but Natalie had insisted on helping with tuition costs. "It's the least I can do after everything you sacrificed for me," she had said when I initially refused. "It's not about keeping score," I'd told her. "That's what Kenneth tried to make us do, turn our relationship into transactions and debts." "I know," she'd agreed, "but I want to do this. Not from guilt, but from love. The way you supported me all those years." So I had accepted, and now at 33, I was finally pursuing the education I had abandoned at 19. It felt strange to be older than most of my classmates, but also empowering. I brought life experience and determination they couldn't match. I had even started dating again cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Jason, A kind-hearted science teacher I met in my biology class had been patient with my trust issues and respectful of my close relationship with Natalie. Tonight, he would be joining us for the housewarming party we were throwing to celebrate the completion of our renovations. "Do you think we have enough food?" Natalie asked, surveying the spread we had prepared together. "Definitely," I assured her, adjusting the platter of homemade appetizers. "Between your gourmet cooking skills and my baking, no one's going home hungry." The doorbell rang, and I felt a surge of joy at the sound. For so long, this house had been a battleground, a source of pain and conflict. Now it was once again a home, filled with warmth and welcome. Our guests began to arrive: Lauren, whose couch had sheltered me in my darkest days; Ethan, whose legal expertise had helped us reclaim our inheritance; Mr. Finley from next door, who had testified about my years of maintaining the property; Mrs. Donovan, Natalie's former teacher; and even Aunt Martha, who had flown in from Arizona for the occasion. As I watched Natalie happily greeting everyone, her face animated and healthy, I felt a profound sense of peace. The sister I had raised, nearly lost, and found again was truly home, not just in this house, but in herself. Later in the evening, as our guests mingled in the living room, Natalie pulled me aside into the quiet of the kitchen. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a small, wrapped package. Inside was a framed document, the formal legal agreement we had signed establishing our joint ownership of the house, with an inscription Natalie had added at the bottom: "Home is where your sister is." "I thought we could hang it next to this," she said, pulling out one more frame from behind her back. It was the original eviction notice from Kenneth's lawyers, now mounted ironically behind glass with a second inscription: "Some bonds can't be broken by legal documents." I laughed through sudden tears. Perfect. A reminder of what we overcame. "And who we are," Natalie added softly. "Sisters by choice, not just circumstance." As we rejoined our guests, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed us had ultimately strengthened our bond. The secret that could have divided us had instead deepened our understanding of family. The loss that had once defined us had given way to new beginnings. Family, I had learned, was not defined by blood or legal documents, but by the choices we make every day to love, to forgive, to stand by each other through the hardest times. Natalie and I had chosen to be sisters in the truest sense of the word, and that choice was stronger than any force that had tried to tear us apart. Looking around at the home we had reclaimed and the life we were rebuilding, I knew that our parents would be proud of the family we had preserved, against all odds. This journey has taught me that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who stands by you when the world turns cold. If you've experienced family betrayal or reconciliation in your own life, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Has karma or justice ever come full circle for you? Please share your experiences and hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more true family stories that remind us all that even in our darkest moments, healing is possible. Thank you for witnessing our journey from betrayal to forgiveness. Sometimes the family we fight hardest to keep is the one most worth saving.